Hello everybody, I'm John Elliff, and today we're going to talk with Willard Lutes about his life in the Navy in World War II. The date is May the 24th, 2001, and we're in Sterling, Colorado, and we're in Willard's room here at the home, and this is who we're going to talk to right here, so we'll get started right away. Just tell us your name. What's your name?
Yeah, my name is Willard Lutes.
Okay.
I'm a native-born Coloradoan.
Okay. Where were you born?
I was born in Marino
Marino, Colorado.
on May 21st, 1960.
Okay. 1960, okay. 1916.
Right, 85 now.
Right, okay. And tell us about, you were raised there. Your dad was a doctor there.
Yes, my father was a family doctor.
Mm-hmm.
He covered the whole, almost, we thought sometimes, the corner of northeast Colorado.
Right.
And he practiced there for over 50 years.
In that town of Marino.
Yeah, on
Yeah.
the outskirts, all the way over to Stoneham, up to Willard, down to Union, the whole
corner.
area there, yeah.
So, well, my dad used to know your dad.
Oh,
I know
yeah,
they used
yeah.
to go back and forth.
Yeah, your
and-
father and mine were real good friends.
Yeah, they were. So you were raised there? Did you go to school
I was
there?
raised there, went through high school there, and then graduated from the University of Denver in
And
1939.
What'd you take at the University of Denver? What was your background?
Basic engineering, civil engineering,
Civil engineering. Okay.
lots of math.
Okay, good. And then what happened to you?
Then after I'd graduated at the end of the mid-semester, the fall semester, I went back to Washington, D.C. and on a bus from Sterling here. And I ended up staying there. I was employed by the General Accounting Office as a junior auditor. And during that period of time, which is just over nearly a 2-year period, I went to law school at George Washington Night School and had a lot of flirtations and one thing and another around the Capitol there.
Okay.
It was quite a social city there. Everything was black, white tie and top hat and tails. And I had just that outfit like that to hit the high points of society.
So you were working for the GAO.
General Accounting Office. Huh?
Right. And what year was that again?
Well, I was 39 and 40.
39 and 40, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you were cutting a wide swath through Washington.
For me, it was pretty wide,
Okay.
all facets. And then with the advent of war coming on and the draft being activated and all, I decided I would apply for a commission in the Navy, which I did, a direct commission, and I was accepted in November of 40, but it was for the Supply Corps.
Okay.
And I really wasn't turned on by going in for however long it might be in the Supply Corps, and I wanted a deck officer commission.
Okay.
So I turned it down. In lieu of that, I was aware of some new activity down in the West Indies, where the United States was going to build a lot of air bases and supporting facilities to protect the Panama Canal. So I was, several of the accountants from my office had signed up with the Corps of Army Engineers to go down there as accountants. And these fellows told me they were looking for engineers too. So I went over to the Army Department and applied for a job to go down to the West Indies. And I went. And we left Washington, about 30 of us, to go into New York on the B&O and left the following day there on a Brazilian freighter passenger ship to head down toward Port of Spain, Trinidad. And We arrived there, and there was an assortment of accountants and engineers. And we enjoyed the trip, especially on this SS Brasilia. It was a Brazilian freighter out of Rio, and had about 80 passengers, most of whom were going back to Rio, had been up to New York and their environs there. And there was one couple on there who was a banker from Port of Spain by the name of Walter Jardine. And there were about 3 of us that got pretty well acquainted with Mr. Jardine and his wife. And so we were destined to go into Port of Spain and report there for further assignment, either to remain there or to go down to the San Juan, the St. Lucia Island, and Antigua, or British Guiana.
British Guiana, yeah.
And that was that at the time.
Right.
And my lot fell to going to Antigua.
I think you got a good draw.
Yeah, and so we took the ones of us that were going there, about 8 of us, and we would be the initial people coming in there, basic first group. We went on a ship out of Liverpool, a ladies' ship. There were about 3 of these lady ships, and we boarded the Lady Hawkins there at Port of Spain, and she was returning with sugarcane and bananas from the West Indies. And so en route to our destination, we stopped at a number of islands, St. Martin's, St. Lucia, Barbados, and various British islands to pick up cargo.
Okay.
It was my first exposure to the war, because Great Britain was involved by that time, and it was a complete blackout on the ship at night. If you're out on deck and open the door to go into the inner compartments anywhere, why, it automatically blacked out the whole passageway. And so that was my first exposure to the war. Okay?
Okay. So you went to Antigua?
So we ended up in Antigua, and got in there, I think it was February of '41. And it was a pretty bare island. Each of those West Indian islands are each different unto themselves. They, whether it be Barbados or St. Lucia, St. Kitts, St. Martin's, all those, each had some peculiarity that was just to itself
Right.
evident there. And Antigua was primarily a sugarcane producing island. And they, of course, the population, the basic white population, were all British. The blacks were real black. They were a little different type features than our black people. And they had a decided British accent. They were very markedly accenting the British language. And but the facilities there were practically nil. The sewers ran down the streets and the gutters, and St. John's was the capital of Antigua. Of course, all those islands are situated on the Caribbean. Beautiful beaches. I think the best beaches I've ever been to anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And, but there were no facilities such as embalming. People there die in the morning, they get them in the ground just as fast as they could.
Okay.
And the medical facilities were poor. And we didn't have any attending physician with us at the time. We had one fellow that developed a bad case of dysentery and had to be flown back to the United States, in fact, down there. So we, there was 4 of us had kind of ganged up as a bunch of buddies, and we found a place to live there with a British woman right there in St. John's, and we survived that ordeal. We noticed she had a rapidly dwindling supply of cats around the house, and we thought we could detect some of that cat meat in some of our meals. But But anyway, you know, there was a humorous side to it and an enjoyable side. It was a decided departure from Port of Spain, which was pretty well developed tourist-wise at the time. Moore McCormick ran quite a lot of cruise ships down in that area at the time, and also Alcoa Aluminum. They, at Antigua, they didn't have any dockage. They had what they call, in naval terms, a roadstead. A roadstead is an area that's more or less like a harbor that ships come in and anchor, and then they send lighters over to take off any cargo and like that. And they have ships that small boats that go back and forth between the island and the ship. And so time went on, and I had a crew of mostly, I had one white man that ran the transit, and the rest of them were all native. And so I had to do some training with them along with my assistant there. And then I was engaged to Margaret. We'd met at DU, and she taught at Craig for 2 years after she graduated. And then she flew down to St. John's there. She flew to New York City first. Her brother lived out on Long Island, and then from there she took a Pan American flying boat down to Antigua. Of course, there weren't any airstrips then, and there was it over at Port of Spain, but not there. And so you had to come by water, land by in the water. And I had a boat to go out and pick her up off the plane there. And so that was her introduction to the. But anyway, I'm digressing from our purpose here.
Let me ask you, what were you building down there? I mean, what was your...
Well, initially, I first was involved in staking out and several airstrips,
Okay.
and with what they call revetments, which is an outdoor horseshoe-shaped storage place for a plane to pull off the runway and be housed in.
Right.
And it was high bank, dirt around it all the way around, except for the entrance. Looked like an open horseshoe. And then, we was taking out hospital site, barracks, and things like that, and all the supporting facilities to the airstrip.
Right. So you laid that all out, and then what happened to you?
Well, after
Margaret came down?
Yeah, she came down, and I had a cohort there that was also an engineer from the Graduate School of Mines here in Colorado, and Joe Snellbaker, and he was from Wichita, Kansas, and he had been employed in Washington, just as I had, and he was engaged to a girl from Washington, from the area, she was from Virginia, and they decided they were going to be married down there, and they were about 3 weeks ahead of us. So we had found a place there in the interim, a nice home that was out from away from town and had a private beach and belonged to a minister there, Anglican minister in the Anglican church. And he had been transferred over to St. Kitts and had this home, and he didn't want to sell it, but he was willing to rent it. So we did that. We rented it, and all of his servants, they had 5 servants. We took them all over.
Just like right now.
Yeah. And so we went through all that, and we kept all of them, but one of them, who was really, she was a maid and waited tables all the time for us, and cleaned up, and had a woman, washerwoman. Murphy was the yard boy, and they did all the cooking on charcoal, over charcoal briquettes. And our only source of power was a gasoline-powered generator that when you turned on a light, it started the generator up, it started putting out some, and our refrigerator was a Kelvinator of kerosene burning.
Okay.
So that was there in the house. And our water was all from the cistern. There was
Rainwater.
no water wells on the whole entire island, which
Yeah.
was 9 by 12 miles in area, 108 square miles. So they were having trouble with this Mina. She was getting kind of sassy and sarcastic and just downright kind of unpleasant. And so we fired her. Well, during all this was going on, we had some more people come in from the States. And there was one young couple that had come out once in a while to visit us. And they had a little boy, and they liked this Mina. So when they heard that we'd fired her, they thought they'd like to hire her. But in this interim period that the girls were exposed to, but later by all the white people that were working on the base, were going to hire any local people. They had to have them get a physical. Well, they had this Mina get a physical, and she had syphilis. So that presented kind of a dilemma to Joe and myself what to do about telling the girls, you know. Finally, we decided we'd just tell them that everybody was supposed to go out there to the dispensary and get a wasserman test for syphilis, and we'd take it too. So everything turned out okay, but we were holding his breath, and our friends didn't get to hire me, no. So, anyways, we survived that, and when they finished the construction there on the base, we headed back to New York, and that was our first return. Well, during that time too, Margaret developed a lot of throbbing in her ears, both ears, and we had a major brewer who was an MD that had come in then after Army personnel started coming in, and he couldn't tell what was wrong. I didn't think too much of him anyway, nobody else did, but so I ended up flying her up to San Juan, where we went to a Puerto Rican ear doctor specialist, and he determined that she had a fungus growth in both ears, and it had to be cauterized out over a period of about a week. So we stayed up there for that time and enjoyed Puerto Rico, and Margaret had gotten some relief and all from her anxiety and aches and pains. But anyway, we went on, when we got out, we flew on up to New York and had a lot of fun up there for a few days. I went down to Baltimore to see a cousin that lived there, and then we went on back to Denver. Then I reapplied for a commission in the Navy, and that time, of course, by that time while we were in the war.
What year was that about? Was that
42.
42, okay.
And yeah, we were, of course, there when Pearl Harbor
Right.
occurred, and it was on a Saturday, and we were all at home, and we didn't know anything about it until the servants came telling us about that we'd been attacked. That's the way we found out. Our radio was not the best, and although we did have some shortwave, but we wouldn't have it down on most of the time, and so that was kind of a jar to us, you know, to know that, well, we were in the war.
Right. So then you went back to New York. You got in the Navy. And back to Colorado.
We applied. And during the time, I didn't know whether I was going to get a commission or not, and it was kind of a question of whether or not I'd get drafted before I got a commission.
Right.
If I got one. And so I went to work temporarily for an architect engineer, R.H. Tipton Company out of Denver, who was putting an airstrip down at Grand Island, Nebraska.
Okay.
So we went down there and stayed, and finished that, and I came back to Denver, and I still hadn't gotten my commission, and I'd had to reapply completely because the other had lapsed and all, and it was in the supply corps anyway. And so I went to work for Denver Rio Grande Railroad, their engineering department downtown Denver, and I told them that I had this commission pending and might or might not be long-term or short-term employment there, and they said, well, whatever, you always have a job here when you get out, whether you've been here a week or 6 months. But it came through pretty quick, and so I took off. I left Denver one morning, February, this in '43, and took the city of Denver back to Chicago and changed over to B&O and on back to report to Princeton University, which was my basic training point.
Okay.
And with me on the train were 2 other Coloradoans. One of them, Hoyt Bronner, who was basketball coach at DU, and the other, Jack Clevenger, who was dean of men at Colorado A&M at those days. So the 3 of us were scheduled to report there to Princeton, and we did, and that lasted 3 months.
How old were you?
I was 25.
25.
Wait a minute. I was 25 when I got married. I was 27. 26.
Okay.
Yeah, 27.
27 years old.
Yeah.
Heading
when I
for
got my-
Princeton.
When I
Okay.
got my commission in February. And it was intense training and just the basic fundamentals, everything from communications, seamanship, gunnery, navigation, all that.
And this was to be a line officer.
Uh-huh,
Okay.
exactly. And all of the other people that were there, and they were from all over the United States. They took over a couple of dorms there on the Princeton campus, and there were 4 of us to a room. So I had 3 roommates, and they were, one of them from Ohio, one of them from Massachusetts, one from Michigan. And we all had various backgrounds. The one that John Hosford, he was been a football coach at one of the big high schools in Detroit, and he was the only one that, he was a little older than any of the others of us, and he had a direct commission as Lieutenant JG.
What were you guys, ensigns?
Ensigns, and glad of it, I guess.
More likely.
Yeah, but I got along real well in navigation. It was mathematical, of a mathematical nature, and so after we had completed that 3 months, why my instructor said, I want to see if I can get you kept here to take over one of the classes. Well, I didn't know whether to say yay or nay, but it didn't go through anyway.
Okay.
They wanted me out there on the line somewhere.
Right. Fill a slot.
Yeah.
Right.
So my orders, needless to say, one of the things there after we left Princeton to go on down, just as a side thought there, Einstein was on the campus at the time, and it was
Right.
real a common thing to see him out somewhere along one of the sidewalks and coming from one building to another. And also Sikorsky, who was one of the inventors of the helicopter. He was there.
Mm-hmm. Sikorsky.
Sikorsky, and anyway, I ended up down at Little Creek Section Base, which was a naval base, and most of the ships out of there were sub-chasers and little larger ships that were yard patrol, they call them. And so as I was assigned to duty on a sub-chaser. Well, the Navy had appropriated a lot of larger yachts when we got into the war, and they initially didn't have a big supply of these smaller vessels that they needed for 2 purposes: convoy escort work and anti-submarine patrol. So I happened to be fortunate, really, to draw a yacht that had been in the Barbara Hutton's family,
Oh, is that right?
Woolworth
Yeah,
heirs.
Woolworth people, yeah. Uh-huh.
It was the SS Loxmont, 140 foot in length, an extra wide 28-foot beam, all teak decks, all mahogany finished interiors and all, and really a beautiful little ship powered by twin Buddha engines. And then the Navy had converted it over to carry depth charges equipped with with sonar gear, underwater sound gear,
Right.
and one 3-inch cannon on the bow and a cluster of 20 millimeter anti-aircraft guns, both forward and aft. And so I was assigned to be the commander of the ship.
Wow, is that
And
right?
I had two other ensigns under me. One was a communications specialist, and the other was an engineer. I was a mechanical or operating engineer for the
Right.
engine room, and had 27 crew men. And most of them were from the Chesapeake Bay area. They'd grown up on the water. Their fathers had been fishermen and all that, and they were good crewmen. Had one black and the rest were all white. And so it was easy because they knew the basic things of, as far as lines and dropping an anchor or whatever, it was, and then the necessary work that had to be entailed in keeping the decks up in good shape and soapstone them down, all that. So we first started out on escort duty. We'd pick up ships, convoy of merchant marine ships, off Cape Hatteras, and then escort them up along the coast, either up or down. And then after we had that a few weeks, and then went over to patrol duty, submarine patrol duty. We had sound men aboard that ran the sonar gear and sound gear, and so that got pretty boring, but we stayed with it and had to. And time or two, one time we were out in real rough weather, and our rudder cable broke. And of course that took everything away from the bow of the ship and control of the ship from the bow to strictly a manned rudder. It was rigged up so you could man the rudder, even in that ship. And you'd call it, they had a rear aft compass. So you'd have somebody back there reading the compass and steering a bearing and compass course, and same way up the bow compass still worked. And we had communications back from bow to stern. Pretty well equipped, after the Navy got through with it. But this one occasion, I called in an emergency and to come in and to depart our patrol, assigned patrol. And so we were in there, I think we were in dry dock, or semi-dry dock, for about a week. And Margaret had come down, and after I got settled there at Little Creek, she came down, and along with our firstborn, Kathy, this was in '43, who was just a few months old. And they had one group of homes around there called Levittown. And they had transportation in and out of there, and also I didn't have to worry about vehicles. And Margaret had access to both the base supply store and all that, and the dispensary. So I'd be out 4 or 5 days, and then in a couple, and back and forth. Our commander of the base was a fellow by the name of Captain Miles. He was quite elderly. He had graduated from Annapolis, and he had written the score, both the lyrics and the the music to Anchors Away.
Oh, really?
And he was
Wow.
better known for that than anything he could have possibly
Sure.
done. But he had a little string of bulldogs, small bulldogs. And he had his private gangway that took him up to his second floor office. So every morning you'd see Captain Miles being driven up there to his gangway and get out with about 4 of his dogs, little bulldogs, and going up the steps, you know. And I had a good friend there that developed that was he was a communications specialist, but he also was a pretty good pianist. And Captain Miles got wind of this, and he appropriated him because he had this desire and drive that he was going to create another Navy tune, or another tune that the Navy would adopt. And so he'd take this Johnny Fellows, his name was, and every chance he'd get, he'd court him and get him into where they had a piano there, and he'd have these tunes that
Yeah.
and usually they would something like Old Black Joe or My Old Kentucky Home or something like that, you know. But they went around and around that. But that was kind of a fun thing with Captain Miles. And one day he had a orderly take his dogs for a walk, and they went down along the dockside there, and there were a couple of minesweepers in there. They just come in and tied up, and they had one of them had a dog, and he was going along there. This kid was going along there with these bulldogs, and this dog got off, and he bred one of these little bulldogs right there on the spot. Well, word got back to Captain Miles, and he had him take that dog down to the infirmary and have it given a douche. And
Abort that dog?
Yeah. So, you know,
Jeez.
things occurred that were humorous, or semi at least humorous.
So you did this, how long did you do the anti-submarine stuff?
Oh,
that
about a year, 3 or 4 months.
Did you? Did you guys ever make contact with a sub?
No, we never
or
did, no.
pop anything or anything like that?
I
So
think
just-
after a while we decided maybe it was kind of ridiculous being out there, running that underwater sound gear and all, but one day we were out there patrolling. This was off of outside of Chesapeake Bay,
Sure.
out in the open waters, and a couple of the guys, the crew, had sighted a school of Spanish mackerel. They do fish, like I said earlier there, why
Yeah.
these guys, most of them, about probably 65% of them had come from around that part of Maryland. And so, boy, they were really all up. And this was like on a Thursday sometime. So they tried to get me talked into doing something about the
Chasing
school of
those
fish.
mackerel.
And they knew how they'd swim, and now the schools usually did when they were in the water and traveling around. And so I finally gave in, and we broke out. I had along these rafts on the side. We had a lot of emergency fishing gear. It came in cans with large hooks and all of that. And so we stripped the rafts of those things and opened them up. They had lines all over the stern, and we'd zigzag back and forth. We did our zigzagging then instead of out on a patrol. And anyway, they were catching them like crazy. These big Spanish mackerel, you know. And so we ran out of room somewhere to put them.
Yeah, really? You had that many?
Yeah, and we had a bunch of ready boxes there that were partly filled with ammunition. And we put fish in there, and we iced them down, and had a pretty good sized reefer in the kitchen. And so we were going to go in Friday morning. We'd be in there about 7 o'clock. So they had it all figured out. This is going to be fish day. There'd be a big market for those Spanish mackerel, you know. So as soon as we hit the dock, well, they were off, and I gave about everybody leave the day off, and most of them had cars, and they were local guys, about all of them, and they got the fish all down there at the fish market, and had a big thing, and we decided that we'd take the funds and put it into an athletic fund, buy baseball equipment, one thing and another. So that's where it went. Captain Miles never knew about it. So
He's too damn
we got
busy.
out free and clear.
So after you did so you did submarine patrol out of the
Out of-
Boston area,
Out in the Norfolk area.
in Norfolk, okay. And then after that, what did you do in the Navy?
Well, I was getting kind of antsy, and I had a friend up in Washington in Vieux-Purs, and I went up to see him. I took a few days leave. And I just went up myself, and I said, I've got to get out of this place. And I had different ones around me were leaving on different duty and getting orders. And so I got back, and I hadn't much more than gotten back down to Little Creek, and I got orders to go up to Boston for a refresher session. You know, the Navy was moving pretty fast, and a lot of things were changing, like especially like the radar and all that we didn't have at all when we went in, and different facets of it. And so I went up to Boston for about a month, and there was 3 others and myself. Found a place over on Marlborough Street, which is over near the Commons, and all those old homes along that part of Boston were all 3-story, and all had bedrooms and a fireplace in every bedroom. So we found this one place that was inviting. They had a place for the 4 of us to come, 2-bedroom upstairs there on the 3rd deck, and fireplaces in each room and all. So that's where we were, and so I waited and waited. Didn't get anything moving around there, and we were taking a little training, but we usually have the afternoons off. And Boston was real hospitable to all, especially I think to the Navy, since it's been on Cape Cod there and all that, and so we had lots of places to go because people were just gracious, overly so. Just couldn't believe it. I get emotional when I think of some of those things.
Yeah, that's okay.
But anyway, so one morning we'd go down and we'd go to some classes, and then we'd wait around when our names were called off to see if any of us had gotten orders. And one morning I did. I had an order to go. And in the meantime, of course, Margaret had stayed down there, and she stayed there in Little Creek, in the house that we had, while I was up in Boston. And so I was to report down to Miami. So I flew down there, and she came along behind me, and her brother at that time was living out in Coral Gables, and he was a long-time pilot with Eastern Airlines. In fact, he was at the time a senior pilot, tenure-wise, with Eastern, and he owned a home there in Coral Gables, and he had this friend who was also a pilot with Eastern that had a home leased up in Miami proper, and he had found a place to buy this fellow had, and he had about 4 months to go on this lease, and so Sam said, well, I'll talk to him and see if maybe you guys, the house will be furnished and you could move in there. So that was done, and Slim had an extra car, and of course gasoline was rationed at the time, but he was able to get pretty good supply of gas. And so he moved into this home on Biscayne Bay, and it had a private pool and real plush place. But anyway, so that's where we were ensconced for a while. And then one morning, we'd muster every morning at 8 o'clock, and the ones of us that were down there. just awaiting orders. And one morning I got orders, and we were all prepped for it pretty much, Margaret and myself, and it was report without delay, immediate orders to San Francisco.
To San Francisco, wow.
Yeah. And I thought, well, I can't do that. I'm not going to go off and leave Margaret to come on the train. So I got on the phone and got orders, or got reservations on B&O there. I don't know what train it was. Anyway, make connections up Chicago and then go on into Denver. So we got out of Miami that night, the same day that I had received orders.
Wow.
And we were on our way. And we got into Denver then a couple of days later. And first thing I had to do was get on the ball and get on back out, go out to Frisco. So that was a fond farewell right there. And then Margaret and Kathy, and I took off for San Francisco. And I wasn't ever asked for an explanation why I was late, or if I was late. Orders were dated 3 days before I got to San Francisco, but so I had a friend who had been chief of Navy personnel, reserve personnel at Viewpers there in Washington. It just so happened he was in town in San Francisco, and I found out. And so he found a place for me. I stayed at the Sir Francis Drake. And I didn't have any idea when I'd get orders or what they'd be. And so one morning there at Miami, or at San Francisco, I got orders to report to the U.S. pilots, U.S. Navy pilots, the 7th Fleet. And Admiral Kincaid was the commander of the 7th Fleet, and that was known as MacArthur's Navy.
Okay.
Because it supported there in the Pacific area all of MacArthur's land moves and all, Island Island, all that stuff, and Kincaid's Navy was behind it, and so nobody had any idea where Admiral Kincaid would be, except that's the way the orders read. So I left San Francisco on an evening on a Pan American plane, the seaplane, and
Right.
flew into Honolulu and was there overnight and left the next day.
How long did it take you to fly San Francisco to Honolulu? What?
Oh, it took almost 8 hours, something like that. It seemed like air hours.
Yeah, okay.
And that was the Constellation, I think it was. What they call that.
Was it a seaplane or was it a land plane?
Seaplane, yeah, it was a seaplane.
Seaplane?
Yeah.
Maybe it was a Constellation.
Well, I used to
Anyway.
Anyway. So I was just there in Honolulu briefly and took out, and then I left on a NATS, Naval Air Transport Command plane, and it was a 4-passenger C-54. And didn't know where we were going for sure. That time, 2 more fellows caught up with me that had similar orders. And nobody knew anything about where this U.S. pilots, Navy pilots, were anything about it. Never heard of it. Anyway, we flew out of there and flew down to Johnson Island over to Manus. They dropped us off at Manus. We still weren't.
Where's Manus?
Manus is between, you know where Johnson Island?
Not exactly, except it's out in the middle of
Yeah, nowhere.
nowhere.
Well, Manus,
Pacific.
Manus was one of the foremost that chain of islands through the South Pacific that was still hadn't been taken over by the Japs,
Okay.
and was still quite a, I think more of a Navy operation than it was an Army, but both. And anyway, that's where I ended up at the time, and this other 2 fellows, myself. And so we waited around. We didn't have to report to anybody, we were just waiting for forwarded orders to go on somewhere, wherever the 7th Fleet was, and nobody knew. Even there on the bay, the Navy people didn't know where sent us. So one morning we were at chow, and they came in and called our names and said we were to report down to the CO's office, and he'd gotten orders for us to go to Brisbane.
Okay.
And that's where MacArthur was at the time. And he was going to work his way on north up toward the Philippines. So we thought, well, that's our destination. Well, we were just down boarding this plane to take off for Brisbane, and it was an Army plane. And there came a guy in a Jeep, and some fellow riding with him, yelling and waving papers and everything else. And they just got word to cancel those orders. We were to go to Milne Bay, New Guinea.
Okay.
So we went back and settled down in our temporary officers' quarters, and waited a couple of days, and finally they got transportation out, and we took off for New Guinea.
And flew down there.
Flew down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, everywhere I went, I'd flown so far. And
Did you have any more rank then than you had when you were chasing subs? Or?
well, I'd gotten up to JG.
JG, okay.
About, yeah.
Okay.
About the time I hit New Guinea. Anyway, it developed that this was something new and a kind of a thing unto itself, this U.S. Navy pilots. They had decided that some of the top brass that they needed some kind of a group that would be able to handle the piloting of surface vessels, more particularly merchant marine vessels, both in and out of Milne Bay of New Guinea proper. And so they set this school up. It was not a school, it was a pool, but there was training too, whereby those individuals who had been designated to be U.S. naval pilots would report and then train for certain waters to qualify for piloting vessels, offshore piloting. And we were given a bunch of British Admiralty charts and Dutch charts.
And you're talking about navigating type piloting?
Yeah.
Like
On the
pilot?
surface water.
Yes, okay. Not aviation piloting, you're talking about
Yeah, ships.
ship piloting?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were kind of given a choice on what waters, what areas we wanted to qualify for out of New Guinea. They were going north up toward Finchhaven, Biak, Hollandia, and through there, or down to Cape Moresby and along the Barrier Reef of Australia. And the idea being that these merchant marine ships would be kept as close inshore as possible to better protect them from submarine attacks.
Okay.
And so it was detailed and very precise piloting.
Right.
We had certain indicated offshore buoys and onshore markers that were still functional that we could use. And most of the time we were within sight of land, and the biggest obstacle, of course, and of basic terror really to us were the reefs.
Right.
Get these ships down and miss the reefs, don't get them hung up on some...
Rip them up.
Yeah, tear the, yeah, okay.
So anyway,
I decided to go all out, and I was pretty good at navigating. I was real good, and it appealed to me. I hadn't had a whole lot of, my main part of handling vessels was this smaller craft out of Little Creek, but as far as navigation and any, if I'm going to do a location for using a sextant or something like that, well, I excel in that. And most of the others that were down there, a lot of them had been river pilots.
okay.
They had a strong association, unionized groups. And they would specialize, you know, in the Mississippi and
Right,
major
Ohio.
rivers and all
Yeah,
that.
sure.
And it was a thing almost of a family occupation, profession, handed down from one generation to the next. And so we had about half of the guys were professional pilots,
Right. Okay.
river pilots, but they adapted to the ocean, open waters just readily. And then a few were from the Coast Guard. And then I had two fellows that kind of shared the same background as I did. There was a fellow who had been a district judge out of Virginia, and another fellow who had operated a deaf, dumb, and blind school in Ohio.
Oh, really?
A sharp guy.
Yeah.
Ambrose, his name was, Andy Ambrose. But anyway, this was a group of just, not necessarily including myself, but a select group of personnel. And the
Sure.
only thing like it that the Navy had, nothing but approach it.
So your mission with the group was to
I
know
would be
these
assigned-
waters like the back of your hand,
You darn right.
and to get these ships through that water
Yeah.
intact.
Safely. Yeah.
And right. And so they were mostly large crafts.
They were
like-
well, initially, the bulk of the merchant marine ships were Liberty ships.
Okay.
They were very poorly designed and poor operating ship.
Yeah.
They had about a top speed of 14 knots.
Yeah.
They were not maneuverable by any manner of means. Then came, soon after I started out and I was doing Liberty ships, and once in a while a tanker. They were just about as old-fashioned or out of line as far as the Liberties, but then it came the Victory ships, and they were quite a lot of an improvement over the Liberties, but pretty much the same hull design and all that. It was just more the functional horsepower and all of that. And tankers improved, and you never knew we might draw a tanker, and we'd be assigned as these ships came up needing, and they were required to take a pilot. And you'd go aboard, and the master of the ship, the captain of the ship, most of the time he'd just go below to his quarters, and you wouldn't see him again until you got where you were going.
Is that right?
You know?
And so
He just turned you over the whole
Yeah.
thing.
yeah.
And I'd stay
And
up
like,
there.
for instance, let's say you were where were you at John's? The island you were on New Guinea, or were you on the?
Yeah, in Melny Bay, Antigua.
And so they
Or
would
Melny Bay.
they would put you on these ships at New Guinea as they came
We
in
would go
there?
out and board the ships.
Right.
Ships that were underway. They had requests that they be slowed down to still in the water practically when you went aboard. And
Right.
they had lower a ladder over the side, and we had little PT type boats that we used to go out, and they were manned by crewmen,
Sure.
Navy, and we'd go up along the side and jump off and grab the ladder, climb up
Like-
there and board the
like-
ship, and have a overnight bag or something along with us.
And then how long would that passage be that you'd take those ships through? Would it be
Anywhere
a day,
from
2, 3?
anywhere from 12 hours to 36 hours, depending on
Yeah.
the destination.
Right.
And then we would disembark whenever we got to the port of arrival, and then we had number one priority to fly back anything that was available, whether it was a Navy plane or the Army, to our base up there at
Get
Milne
back
Bay.
in there. Do it over.
So we were there at Milne Bay, and a part of Milne Bay that was called Illinois. And the Army had a major facility across the bay from us at Gabadodo, but at Illinois, the only activity there, Navy-wise, was a naval hospital.
Okay.
So we messed there. Then we had our own quarters, two to a frame,
How many people were in that contingent? I mean, that were pilots?
20.
20 of you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And how about?
We
okay.
had trainees that trained under us then that came out. I was one of the first ones out.
How long were you there?
I was there for about 8 months.
Okay.
Then things had moved north. including MacArthur, had gone up north to Hollandia. And I was down in Brisbane at the time that he moved out that day. Big grand piano going aboard this Army transport. And so there at,
About what date was that when you moved out of there?
that was 44,
About 44, okay, so we're cranking up.
45,
Okay,
yeah, when I moved out.
getting along towards.
Yeah, and yeah, well, we had there at Milne Bay, we were just north of the China Straits and China Sea,
Yeah,
and the Navy, it's about the same time that they had appropriated this Luxmont from the Hutton family. There was a Singer sewing machine yacht, 3-masted schooner, 89 feet in length, that was down in Brisbane, and they took it over. Well, we got that for a pilot vessel, and we anchored it up a little island called Samurai, Pearl of the Pacific, it was known as, just outside the China Straits, and we used that to keep a crew on board, and then we had these little PT boats that would come off the. It was the SS Navigator, was the name of this Singer sewing machine plant boat, and so we used that, and it was a beautiful ship. And we only had one fellow there that, and he wasn't connected with the base at all, but knew about sailing, something like a 3-masted schooner, and he was from up in New England and had sailed a lot of ships, and once in a while we'd raise all the masts on the schooner and get that. We were all rigged up. We were going to then decide that everything was going to move north. And I was scheduled to go to the Philippines.
okay,
So I went to the Philippines and reported in at Subic Bay. Then I became a docking pilot and a harbor pilot.
okay,
It's still with mainly merchant marine ships, and other ships that I handled were of mostly Navy transports and Navy supply ships, not any of the line ships, battle wagons or anything like that, or even destroyers. But so there I was used, and I reported there to the harbor master, and who was a naval officer. That was what I did there, and then I was there when the war ended, and so I thought, well, I'll get out of here as fast as I can. And before I could get out, an aide from the harbor master's office came up to where I was quartered and said, "You need to see you down at the harbor master's office, Captain somebody or other." So I went down there, and here along with me was coming in about the same time was another officer. And the harbor master said, "Now we've had a request from the Navy to have somebody board these merchant marine ships that are all lying here in Subic Bay and up at Manila Harbor to ascertain whether or not they would be readily and reasonably well converted to a temporary transport. We have all these Filipinos that have been displaced over the period of this occupancy, the Japs there and all that and stuff. And they were sure. You've never been to the Philippines, probably, do you? Have you?
No, I haven't been to the Philippines.
You don't have any idea how many islands there are in that chain, Philippines, and people were scattered all over. So that was our duty. And this other officer, he was Pospisil, no relation to Bill. He was an engineer, and I was a deck officer. So I was responsible for checking out the holds and all of that, and on these merchant ships, and he would check out the engine rooms and the shape of the engine. And then they'd take certain ones and set them aside, and well, you're going to, and we weren't very popular because the word got around pretty fast, you know, these guys are coming around to see if you're going to have to use us for a temporary transport. But, so we couldn't pass on all of them anyway. So that was my last duty with the Navy, and that lasted about, 2-3 weeks.
And,
I flew home.
And then what happened to you then?
I flew back to Seattle.
You flew back?
Flew back to Seattle.
Okay.
Then took a train.
When did you get out of the service then?
I got out of the service in about March of '46.
46, okay. And then, but you've done a lot of other things since then, March. And what was your final rank when you got out?
Lieutenant senior grade.
Lieutenant senior.
Yeah, I had about 3 months to go, and I was made lieutenant commander. But all I wanted to do was get out.
Should have gone to medical school, see.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you got out,
Yeah.
and then what happened to you? I mean,
I
and
don't
how old
know.
were you?
I was 31 or 31, I guess.
Okay, and you were out of the service, no job. The guys told you could come back to
That,
the railroad.
yeah, Alfred Perlman was head of the Denver and Rio Grande at the time, and he later went back and took over New York Central
Yeah, right.
Railroad. And he's the one that I was hired by, and he told me to come back after I was there about 2 weeks. But anyway, no, I really was kind of floundering around, and so happened that my dad had this place down at Marino, and the farm and ranch. And,
Right.
my dad was not real well right at that particular time, and he had was faced with a fellow that he had handling the cattle and the farm, Ernest Miller, was going to leave. So I came down there, and we settled in there for a little while. And I always liked the cattle. So I didn't farm any. I started taking care of the cattle, and it wasn't income enough. And about that time, Arapahoe Pipeline, the initial development of the Denver-Julesburg Basin.
Back to
Marino.
Marino, and you started a cattle business in Marino, and your dad was there. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then I went to work for Arapahoe Pipeline, first as a station engineer, and that is of short duration. And I took over the job of right-of-way and damage agent for Arapahoe construction damages. And I served in that capacity for about 30 years.
Wow, did you?
Yeah, and I bought a lot of right-of-way, and in between times I did a lot of survey work, laying out routes for new pipeline proposals.
Tell us about the big pipelines you built. Now, you built some big ones.
Yeah, well, the biggest one, I built several before I left Arapahoe. One of them was the Ute pipeline, and it was a 10-inch crude oil line that originated in what was called the Lisbon area of Utah, north of Monticello and south of Moab. And that was a big crude oil producer for Pure Oil Company.
Okay.
And so they laid this line down across Utah there to tie in with an existing line. It was operated by Shell that ran out to the west coast. And this was a major project. We had 2 carloads of dynamite sent in for blasting purposes, along with 2 powder experts from DuPont, and a lot of rock ditch, and across a lot of varied terrain. Everything from a few tracts of irrigated land to across a portion of the Navajo reservation, a lot of public domain BLM land that all had to be cleared before our route would be okayed for any going across any Indian burial grounds, or they didn't have teepee in the Navajos. But anyway, and a lot of dealings with Mormon people, and they were very nice to deal with. I had a lot of interesting things happen to me on the Navajo reservation. We were required to have a Navajo interpreter with us all the time, and we got an elderly Navajo from Winter Rock, which is the Navajo capital of the reservation, Winter Rock, Arizona, and his name was Bernardine White Goat. So he would escort me in particular anywhere we'd go and have some dealings, direct dealings with some of the Navajo people who didn't really have any fee land, nothing in their names, but did have certain allocated rights, like a spring or something like that.
Tribal rights and so
Yeah,
forth.
and so there was a dealing directly with them through the council and Bernadine, White Goat, and then the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, had a strong operation there at Winter Rock, representing the U.S. government, but they had to take second place to the Navajo Council. So I encountered a lot of interesting things. We had a major contractor on that out of Lubbock, Texas, H. Fulton, and there was actually a lot of heavy-duty equipment, like especially heavy, big D8s and D12 cats, and for clearing, and then backhoes, and then drilling rigs to drill holes to blast some of this rock ditch and stuff. And one morning, I was staying at Monticello in a motel there, and had been up there for about 4 months, and we were getting pretty well down on the Navajo reservation, and we'd come down to a Navajo by the name of Yellowman, Hugh Yellowman, and he had a spring, and he was worried about that spring, and we couldn't pay the Indians, the Navajo, anything directly for construction or for damages of any kind. It all had to go through the tribal council. But he was pretty insistent, and this one morning I was coming down right as you approached the Indian reservation where we were working that particular time. You kind of came over a crest of a high rocky cliff, and you looked down ahead across the reservation. And this was about 8 in the morning, and I out there, and there wasn't anything turning. Everything was shut out. I got on down there, which is about probably 4 miles distant, and here was where they'd shut down the last night before. Here was a big D8 there, parked right over the ditch line where it was surveyed out and all, and here was Hugh Yellowman's wife with a little baby cradle in her arms, nursing it, sitting right with her back against that dozer. She wasn't going to budge till I got some money. And she was following Hugh's, her husband's instructions. Now you stay there. And finally, so I put out a call for Bernadine immediately. So he came, and he'd gone back to, this was on a, I don't know, he'd gone back to Winter Rock or something, so he wasn't right in the area. And I got him, he got up there as fast as he could, which is about a 4-hour drive. And so he got Mrs. Yellowman out from the front of the dozer, but they couldn't, till we got it all settled, they couldn't start any more construction. And so we went over to Hugh's hut there, and all went inside, and it was just dog droppings all over the floor in there, dirt floor, you know, the whole gone. And we sat down there, and so Bernadine says, "You tell me what you want, what they're saying, and we know that, you know." And so I'd relay some message to Bernadine, and then he'd speak in Navajo. Two or three other people were there by that time in Navajos, and you didn't say anything till he turned to you, and okay, it's your turn. And so we went on and on about it most all afternoon. And finally we arrived at something, an agreement, and Hugh understood that his father-in-law was there by that time, and that was, he was Little Man. He was the father of Yellowman's wife. And he told him he should agree to that we'd do if there was any construction damages, well, we'd take care of it and all that. And we'd also pipe out the spring water and put it into a tank, you know. So anyway, we went on, then we got going again on the construction that went on. So that was a job, and a lot of things on it that things I ran into up there, first started out there on the north end of that line, and there was a little town up there that was on the map as Ogden Center. And it so happened that we weren't going to go across anything within Ogden Center itself, but down toward Monticello, there was some pretty rich irrigated land. And we were going to go across part of half a section there that belonged to the people in Ogden Center. And so when I had to do a lot of title searching all the time at the courthouse and all. And I found out it was the name of about 10 different people. And Marie Ogden was the lead name, and then there's a bunch of others, mostly male names, and a few women's names. But the property is jointly held, and that's about 10 people. And so I was working somewhat with the county attorney there, who was Red. His name was Red, his given name, or surname. And so I got up with him, and I said, Benyon, who is this Marie Ogden? Well, he said, she's up at Ogden Center. He said that. Then he went on to tell me about the history of this Ogden Center. It was a group that had come out from Princeton, New Jersey, and from New York's NYC, University of New York. And they were believed in reincarnation and were strict vegetarians. And all of these people had come out from Princeton and back there to found this, what they thought was their place. They were going to be reincarnated and all that. And the people came out. Some of them were well educated. Marie Ogden and her husband were apparently. And so this settlement was founded. It was a baron, and they had to homestead it. And it was just bare rock practically, and sagebrush and nothing. And but they had this vision. One of their members, Ogdenites, have recalled, and of this thing that they envisioned this barren country, and all came to them, and they finally determined they'd send out pilgrims to check out the different sites that they thought might be. And this is where it finally was determined it was there, in this part of Utah, southeastern Utah. And so they started this, and they had different ones. The disciples and all that were there, and Marie was the reincarnation of the Virgin Mary. And I don't know whether she made that determination or whether they all voted on it or what, but anyway. By the time I got there, why, they had reduced themselves to just a handful of people. They had 3 kingdoms in this Ogden Center. One was the lower kingdom that all neophytes that were coming out from back east started at, and then the middle kingdom, and then the upper realm. And Marie was up there at the top. And then they had nobody in the lower realm where they came for a year or so, tryout and exposure to the rigors and all of the country. And then they went to graduated to the middle, and then if they kept going, why? So I had Peter, Paul, and I don't know, somebody else. They were still in existence. I took the deed out to Marie, and she was a lovely little lady. She had lost her husband, and she had a daughter who was, she was probably 50. And Marie was in her late 70s, well educated. And she made sack rugs out of using gunny sack and filling in with colored cord and whatever she could get, I guess. And they didn't have any modern facilities out there, just a gas or kerosene-fired icebox. That was it. No lights. But anyway, we went over these names, and she said, well, this one's here, and this one's still here, and this one, I think, is dead, and this one's moved to California, and I don't know where she is and all. So I called Chicago, and was the headquarters of Pure Oil. And they said, well, just get as many as you can, and go from there. Well, that's what I did. And then I felt real sympathetic to Marie, and when I settled damages, I put in a couple $1,000 extra settlement, I could justify it. And anyway, so I bought a carpet from her, one of her little rugs, and then we exchanged Christmas cards for, I guess about 3 years. And I'd write her a little message and she'd write me, And so I don't know, it's not on the map anymore.
Oh,
But I had a lot of them, I could tell you, from now till sundown.
so that big pipeline you built, how long did it take to build that? Did it take you to
Oh,
build
about 6 months.
6 months is all. Wow, that was fast, wasn't
Well,
Six.
it wasn't too long, it was about, I don't know, 90 miles.
it? 90 miles. Now, what other
The
pipelines
other
did,
one, one of the other ones that I was on that was a major, it was after I took early retirement from Arapahoe in '78 when I was 62. And City Service Gas had taken over, had bought out Arapahoe because the crude oil was dwindling down to practically nothing in the basin here. And so I went to work for them. I quit on the 31st of May of 76. What did I say, 76? No, 72. Anyway, went to work the next day for City Service. I worked for them. They were going to extend the line from Moreno up to Rawlins, Wyoming, with a 20-inch line and converted over the whole system over to natural gas. So I finished with them on the area that I was supposed to cover, getting a right of way and all, and went to work then about 6 months later, first part of '79, with the Natural Gas Pipeline Company of America, which had a subsidiary, People's Gas of Chicago. They were primary purchasers of gas for Chicago. So I went to work for them as an independent contractor. And so I had a couple projects local, and this Trailblazer pipeline on the door there was pending. And after I'd been there for a couple of years, well, it was approved, and they got all the partners together and everything like that. And natural gas was the major operator, and it was responsible for the construction. So as I say, that was a 36-inch line.
wow, 36.
36-inch pipeline, yeah.
That's about one of the biggest ones in the world, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, 48.
Is
The,
it?
the Alaska pipeline, Prudhoe Bay pipeline is 48. That's crude oil, this was gas. It originated over in the overthrust area around Evanston, Wyoming,
Okay.
and extended over easterly to Beatrice, Nebraska, where it tied into an existing pipeline. And so my segment was from the Colorado-Kansas line to up across Colorado and parts of Nebraska and back up to just south of Cheyenne.
Okay. Did you have any big problems with that?
Oh, some. I had a lot of, not a lot, but I had several condemnations.
So you had, and you
Had
had right of
go to-
eminent
go to-
domain, so you went through on there.
Well, I had to go to court. We go to court.
And get it worked out, huh?
Well, yeah, most cases, why?
Well, isn't that all buried pipe and everything? I mean.
Oh, yeah, it's all coated and cathodically protected from corrosion, and
Just people didn't want you running it through the
4
place and
foot,
stuff.
4 foot of cover.
Mm-hmm.
So that meant at least a 7 foot deep ditch.
Yeah.
And of course, we had a good contractor. We had Morrison Knudsen,
Right.
one of the largest dirt moving and earthworking contractors, among other things. It was, and they had a lot of know-how and good equipment, good operators. It made it a lot easier on me. And they would have headquartered here in Sterling, but they didn't get the incentive that they got out of Sydney, so they had their main office up in Sydney,
Oh, yeah.
field office.
Yeah.
But they were good, and and we did what they call double ditching. A lot of cases where going across, well, even past that, you stripped off the topsoil first and put it in a separate row, one side of the ditch, and then the other side of that row, while you took the rest of the
The
ditch
deep
and
stuff.
put it over there, and then so that basically the topsoil would get removed and put back in the same position it occupied before. But
Okay.
So then I tell you how I got to Sterling Living Center.
Sterling Living Center.
I say that in the Lord voice. But anyway, I've had a lot of fun, a lot of different things, all pretty much connected.
Right. Okay, now Terry's gonna take some pictures of your
Docking, well, you had to be pretty well aware of what the currents,
were,
underwater currents might do to you. And you do these dockings unassisted. You couldn't have a tug the way they do in New York Harbor somewhere. You just did it just bare ass.
by the power of the boat,
Yeah, just use that, getting a line over wherever you get off the stern or over. Come in, usually get one over midships or on the foredeck and get it tied up there one way or another, then warp it over.
Right, work it over.
Yeah.
That's him when he was a, let's see, that's an ensign.
What year was the photo? Do you know?
Hmm?